The steel deck of the USS Patriot gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, polished to a mirror finish that reflected 22 faces standing at rigid attention. 21 men, 1 woman. Captain Kira Ashford stood at the end of the formation, her face carved from stone, her posture perfect. She had learned long ago that stillness was the best armor. The air tasted of industrial cleaner and salt water that somehow penetrated even this sealed environment deep within the carrier's belly. The ventilation system hummed its monotonous rhythm overhead, occasionally interrupted by the distant thunder of fighter jets launching from the flight deck 4 levels above. Every operator in the room breathed carefully, measuring each inhalation as they waited. The clock on the bulkhead read 0600 hours exactly when the heavy door swung open with mechanical precision. Admiral Vincent Harrow entered like a storm front, his chest heavy with ribbons and medals that caught the light with each step. 2 junior officers flanked him, tablets in hand, their faces carefully neutral. Behind them, a figure that made Kira's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Master Chief Thaddeus Sterling, Wolf. 62 years old, shoulders still squared, eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Wolf's expression gave away nothing, but Kira saw the slight tension in his weathered hands. He knew what was coming. They both did. "At ease," Harrow announced, though no one truly relaxed. His voice carried the particular authority of a man who had spent 3 decades convincing others he deserved it. "Annual combat readiness inspection. Let's make this efficient, gentlemen." He paused, then added with deliberate emphasis, "And lady." A few operators shifted weight almost imperceptibly. The tension in the room thickened. Harrow moved down the line with practiced efficiency, stopping occasionally to ask perfunctory questions. Equipment status, recent deployment histories, physical fitness scores. The men responded in clipped military precision, their answers falling into the comfortable rhythm of routine inspection. "Yes, sir." "No, sir." "2 weeks ago, sir." The Admiral barely seemed to register their responses, already moving to the next man, the next question, the next box to check on whatever mental list drove this performance. Chief Petty Officer Jackson Murdoch stood 4 positions from Kira. His face remained carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked Harrow's progress down the line. Unlike the younger operators who fidgeted with nervous energy, Murdoch had been through too many inspections to waste effort on anxiety. He had also been through enough to recognize when an inspection was something else entirely. As Harrow approached Kira, something changed in the room's atmosphere. It was subtle, the kind of shift only combat veterans recognize. Breathing patterns altered slightly, shoulders tensed by millimeters. Eyes that had been focused straight ahead now flickered sideways, watching without appearing to watch. The Admiral slowed his pace, examining her with exaggerated scrutiny that made his intention transparent to everyone present. This was theater. This was a message being delivered to the entire unit. "Captain," he said, letting the word hang in the air as he glanced at the tablet one of his aides handed him. "Ashford, is it?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was quiet but carried perfectly, neither loud nor soft, trained to hit exactly the right frequency to be heard without echoing. Harrow studied the glowing screen, his expression sliding from professional interest into something resembling skepticism mixed with theatrical concern. "Transferred in from Joint Special Operations Command Support Division 8 months ago." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "Your operational record is remarkably sparse for someone assigned to this unit." "Yes, sir." The same tone, no inflection, no defense, no explanation offered. "Tell me, Captain Ashford," he continued, his voice rising just enough to ensure every operator in the room heard clearly, "what exactly did you do before joining us? Your file lists forward support operations, but the details are surprisingly vague." "Classified support operations, sir. Middle East theater." Several operators exchanged glances. Support operations could mean anything from logistics to intelligence analysis, to drone operation. It could also mean nothing at all. Support, Harrow repeated, drawing the word out as though examining it for hidden meanings. And they saw fit to fast-track you directly into operational status with one of the Navy's premier SEAL teams. He didn't phrase it as a question. The implication hung in the air like smoke. "I serve where ordered, sir." How admirably obedient. Harrow's mouth twitched with something that might have been amusement. A few junior operators, reading their commander's cues like sheet music, allowed themselves small smirks. "And you've seen combat, I presume? Or was your support work confined to safe zones behind the wire?" Kira's eyes remained locked forward, focused on a point somewhere beyond the Admiral's shoulder, beyond the steel bulkhead, perhaps focused on something only she could see. "I've seen action, sir." "Is that so?" Harrow's smile widened, and he turned slightly to ensure his profile was visible to the entire formation. This was the moment he had been building toward, the crescendo of this particular performance. "Then tell me, Captain Ashford, for the benefit of your teammates who will be trusting their lives to your capabilities, what's your count?" The question landed like artillery in the confined space. Everyone knew what he was asking. Confirmed eliminations. The metric that some still used, privately, to measure an operator's effectiveness. It was a question rarely asked in formal settings, never during inspections, and asking it publicly was either profound ignorance or calculated cruelty. The silence stretched. In the back of the room, a communications officer slipped in quietly, moving toward one of Harrow's aides with urgent steps. The aide stiffened as he listened to whispered words, then tried to catch the Admiral's attention with increasingly obvious gestures. Harrow waved him off with an irritated flick of his hand, his focus remaining locked on Kira. "I'm waiting for an answer, Captain." "Respectfully, sir," Kira said, her voice still perfectly modulated, "I don't keep count." Harrow actually laughed. The sound was sharp and theatrical, designed to be shared. Most of the room joined him, though the laughter felt forced, obligatory. A few operators, including Chief Murdoch and Wolf, remained completely still, their faces unreadable. "Come now, Captain," Harrow said, tapping the tablet with his index finger. "Numbers don't lie. It's a simple question for someone who claims to have seen action. 1, 2, 5? He paused, then delivered what he clearly believed to be the killing blow. "Did you fire your weapon at all?" The aide tried again, more urgently this time, practically stepping into Harrow's peripheral vision. The Admiral silenced him with a sharp gesture that carried the weight of command and warning. Kira's eyes shifted slightly, catching the aide's panicked expression for a fraction of a second. She saw the tablet in his shaking hands, saw the red classification headers, saw the recognition dawning in his face. Then her gaze returned to its forward position, as still and calm as deep water. "Admiral," the aide attempted once more, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying unmistakable urgency. "I said I'm waiting," Harrow snapped, not at the aide but at Kira. The Admiral's jaw was set now, his face flushed slightly. This had become about more than inspection, more than testing a new team member. This had become about dominance, about establishing order, about ensuring everyone in this room understood exactly where they stood in the hierarchy. Kira drew a slow breath. The room seemed to hold its collective breath with her. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the suddenly silent space, clear and precise as a bell. 467 confirmed, sir." She paused for exactly one heartbeat. 83 probable. The room didn't just go quiet, it froze. The number seemed impossible, larger than what entire platoons might accumulate across multiple combat deployments, larger than what any single operator, even the most decorated snipers, might claim across a full career. The smirk on Harrow's face remained in place, but it had become a mask, frozen and lifeless. Something changed in his eyes. First confusion, then disbelief, then the first cold flicker of recognition. and something that might have been fear. "What did you say?" His voice had lost its mocking edge. It came out barely above a whisper. 467 confirmed, sir. 83 probable. Those are the numbers from my classified operations file, if the Admiral would care to verify. The aide moved forward again, this time pushing the tablet directly into Harrow's hands, despite protocol. The Admiral took it with fingers that trembled slightly. His eyes scanned the screen, and the color drained from his face like water from a shattered glass. The tablet's screen reflected in his widening eyes. Red classification headers, black budget operation codes, a photograph showing a younger woman in tactical gear, face partially obscured but unmistakable. And below that, a single word in bold letters, Phantom. Harrow's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. His hand gripped the tablet so tightly his knuckles went white. Throughout the formation, reactions rippled like concentric circles from a dropped stone. A senior operator whispered something under his breath. Another closed his eyes briefly, his face showing recognition and something resembling awe. Chief Murdoch's posture became impossibly straighter, if such a thing were possible. And at the back of the room, Master Chief Thaddeus Sterling stood perfectly still, his weathered face betraying no emotion, but his eyes locked on Kira with an intensity that spoke of 12 years of waiting, 12 years of silence, 12 years of carrying a truth that could finally be spoken. "Your previous designation?" Harrow asked, and his voice had changed completely. The theatrical command was gone. This was the voice of a man who had just seen a ghost walk through the door. "Joint Special Operations Command Task Force Wraith, Operational Detachment Sigma." Kira's voice remained steady, factual, as though she were reading from a technical manual. "Call sign, Phantom." The words hit the room like a physical force. Several operators stiffened. One took an involuntary half-step backward. Chief Murdoch's jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. Harrow's complexion had gone beyond pale to something resembling ash. His breathing had become shallow, rapid. The tablet trembled in his hands. "Dismissed," he said abruptly, turning away from the formation, from Kira, from the eyes of 22 operators who had just witnessed their commanding officer's carefully constructed authority shatter like glass. "Everyone dismissed, now." No one moved immediately. The shock of the abrupt command, the break in protocol, the visible distress of the Admiral left them frozen in uncertainty. "I said dismissed." Harrow's voice cracked slightly on the second word. The formation broke. Operators filed toward the exit in disciplined silence, but every eye turned toward Kira as they passed. Some looks held confusion. Others showed dawning comprehension. A few revealed something close to reverence. Kira remained at attention until the room had nearly emptied. Only then did she move toward the exit with the same measured, economical motion that characterized everything about her. "Ashford!" Harrow's voice stopped her 3 steps from the door. She turned, came to attention, waited. The Admiral stood alone now, his aides having retreated to a respectful distance. The tablet hung loosely in his hand. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and Kira met his gaze with eyes that had seen things that would never appear in any official record. Things that had earned every single one of those 467 confirmed kills. "My office," he said finally. 15 minutes. Kira walked the curved corridors of the USS Patriot with the same quiet efficiency that marked her every movement. Around her, personnel created space without quite knowing why. Conversations faltered as she passed. The number, 467, traveled through the ship like electricity through copper wire, racing ahead of her, transforming her from an unknown quantity into something else entirely. She noted the reactions without acknowledging them. The widened eyes, the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she came within earshot, the way senior NCOs straightened their posture as she passed, an unconscious recognition of something they couldn't quite name. She paused outside the Admiral's office, checking her watch. 14 minutes since dismissal. She waited the additional 60 seconds, standing perfectly still in the corridor. Not early, not late. Precision had kept her alive for 12 years. There was no reason to abandon it now. At exactly 15 minutes, she knocked. Enter. Harrow's voice had regained some semblance of authority, though something fundamental had changed in its timbre. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo in the small space. The office was surprisingly austere for a flag officer. Functional furniture, minimal decoration. A single photograph on the desk showed a younger Harrow receiving his first command at sea, pride evident in his squared shoulders and raised chin. The overhead lights had been dimmed slightly, throwing half the room into shadow. Sit, Harrow gestured to the chair across from him. Between them on the desk lay a sealed file, its cover marked with black classification bars and red handling instructions. The kind of file that technically didn't exist, that would never appear in any official records, that contained truths too dangerous for normal channels. Kira sat with the same precise economy of movement, her back straight, hands resting lightly on her knees. Harrow opened the file slowly, as though it might contain something poisonous. His eyes scanned the first page, and his jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 12 years, he said, not looking up from the documents. 12 years I've carried Khyber Pass as mine. Yes, sir. Her voice betrayed nothing. No anger, no accusation, just acknowledgement of a fact. 43 men credited to my command decisions that day. He turned a page, revealing after-action reports and photographs. A mountain pass covered in snow, bodies scattered across rocky terrain like discarded toys. A younger Harrow, his face bloody, receiving a silver star from a general whose name had been redacted from the caption. 42, sir. The correction was quiet but absolute. Harrow's hands stilled on the page. He looked up, and for the first time since she had entered the office, he truly looked at her. Not at Captain Ashford, not at the operator who had shocked his formation, but at the 22-year-old lieutenant who had dragged him bleeding through snow while gunfire tore the air apart around them. You were never supposed to resurface, he said, turning another page to reveal an operational chart with multiple names redacted into black bars. Task Force Wraith was disbanded, all operators reassigned he stopped, or listed as casualties of unrelated operations, Kira finished, her voice flat. Operational security, then why are you here? The question came out raw, stripped of military formality. Why now? New administration, new priorities. She nodded toward the window where, through the reinforced glass, the Pacific stretched endlessly. The old ghosts are being called back. Harrow's intercom buzzed. Admiral, SecNav on Secure Line 1, Priority Alpha. He didn't move to answer it. His eyes remained locked on Kira, searching for something in her face. They know you're here. They sent me here, sir. A pause. The question is whether they sent me because of you or despite you. The intercom buzzed again, more insistent. Harrow ignored it, leaning forward. The count, is it accurate? To the best of my knowledge, sir. I didn't keep the tally. Joint Special Operations Command Intelligence did. For what purpose? But even as he asked, understanding crossed his face. Asset valuation, cost-benefit analysis. Kira didn't respond. The silence was answer enough. You were given impossible missions, Harrow said, and there was something in his voice that might have been regret or might have been self-justification. No, sir. Just missions no one else could acknowledge. She nodded toward the file, toward the photographs of Khyber Pass. Like Afghanistan. For the first time, Kira leaned forward slightly. The movement changed everything in the room. I had a sister, sir, Lisa. She was 19 when our father died in Fallujah. Colonel Nathaniel Ashford. You served with him. Harrow's eyes widened slightly. Nathan Ashford was your father? Yes, sir. He died in 2006. I was on a classified mission in Yemen when it happened. Officially dead myself by then. I couldn't even send flowers to his funeral. Her voice remained steady, but something harder entered it. Lisa's 28 now, has a 3-year-old son I've never met, James. She sends photos sometimes, to a secure drop, but I've been dead to them for 12 years. She paused, letting that sink in. 16 operators couldn't go home after Khyber Pass. 4 died in that snow. 12 more were erased afterward to keep convenient secrets. And their families, like mine, were told lies. The Admiral closed the file with deliberate care, as though handling something fragile. His hands rested on top of it, fingers spread across the classification markings. What happens next, Phantom? That depends on you, sir. The words hung between them like a challenge. What's in that file is only part of the story. We both know that. The intercom buzzed a third time. A light began flashing on Harrow's desk phone, indicating a secure override call that could not be ignored indefinitely. I have to take this, he said, but his eyes remained locked with hers, searching for something he seemed unable to find. Yes, sir. She stood, moved to the door, her hand resting on the handle. Then she paused without turning back. For what it's worth, Admiral, she said quietly, I never wanted the count. I just did what was necessary so others wouldn't have to. As she closed the door behind her, she heard Harrow pick up the secure line. His voice was carefully controlled, professionally calm, the voice of a man who had spent 3 decades learning to hide what he truly felt. Yes, Mr. Secretary, I understand the sensitivity. A pause. Yes, she's here. Another pause, longer this time. No, sir, I don't believe that will be necessary. Kira walked away down the corridor, aware of every eye that tracked her movement, every conversation that died in her wake. The number had preceded her, transformed her, made her into something that existed between legend and nightmare. By midday, it had spread throughout the entire carrier. 467, the number that shouldn't exist. The count that turned a person into a weapon into a ghost into something the Navy had tried to bury and forget. In the senior enlisted mess, Master Chief Thaddeus Sterling sat alone at a corner table, a cup of coffee growing cold between his weathered hands. He had made no attempt to approach Kira since the inspection, had given no indication that he knew her beyond what appeared in her official file. But his eyes tracked every mention of her name, every whispered conversation that rippled through the ship's 5,000 personnel. Chief Petty Officer Murdoch slid into the seat across from him without asking permission. The younger man's face was troubled, his coffee cup trembling slightly as he set it down. Wolf, Murdoch said quietly, using the nickname that only those who had served with Sterling for years were permitted. The number, is it real? Sterling took a long sip of coffee before answering. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 4 decades in uniform, of truths seen and secrets kept. Numbers don't lie. Isn't that what the Admiral said? But 467, Murdoch shook his head. That's not possible. Not for one operator, not across an entire career. Depends on the missions. Sterling's eyes fixed on something beyond the bulkhead, beyond the ship, perhaps seeing different mountains, different deserts, different blood. Depends on who's giving the orders and who's doing the dying. You know her. It wasn't a question. Sterling was silent for a long moment. Then, I knew her father, Colonel Nathaniel Ashford, best combat officer I ever served with. Died in Fallujah, 2006. Took shrapnel meant for me in a firefight near the city center. He paused, his jaw tightening. I promised him on his deathbed I'd look after his daughter if anything happened to him. Did you? I tried. The words came out heavy with old guilt. Trained her at Bragg from 2010 to 2012. She was 20 years old, smart as hell, could outshoot men with twice her experience. Taught her everything I knew, everything I learned in Desert Storm, everything I learned after. He finally met Murdoch's eyes. Then they took her. Task Force Wraith, black budget, deep cover, and I couldn't follow. What happened to her? What happens to all ghosts, Sterling said quietly. She disappeared. I got word in 2013 that she'd been killed in Caracas. Training accident, they said. I went to the funeral, closed casket, military honors. I stood there with her sister Lisa, holding that girl while she cried, knowing something was wrong, but unable to prove it. Murdoch absorbed this in silence. And now she's back. Now she's back. Sterling's weathered hands wrapped around the coffee cup. And somebody's going to pay for 12 years of lies. Murdoch started to ask another question, but Sterling raised a hand. The men are talking. Let them talk. But you tell them this from me. Whatever story they think they don't know half of it. And the half they don't know is the part that would keep them awake at night. In her quarters, Kira stood before a small mirror, studying her reflection with clinical detachment. 34 years old, face marked by sun and wind, and 12 years of living in places where survival meant never being seen. Eyes that had tracked targets across deserts and mountains in urban hellscapes. Hands that had held weapons, held the dying, held truths that could never be spoken. She changed into physical training gear with the same precise movements that characterized everything about her. Each action deliberate, each motion economical. Nothing wasted. The workout was methodical, working from neck to ankles, addressing specific muscle groups that carried the accumulated stress of a dozen years in the field. The routine was meditative, allowing her mind to process the day's events while her body moved through patterns learned long ago. She had known Harrow would react exactly as he did, had known the number would spread through the ship like wildfire, had known that everything that followed would be inevitable, unstoppable, like an avalanche triggered by a single stone. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. On her small desk beside the regulation laptop sat a smooth gray stone with a single white line running through it. She had carried it out of the Hindu Kush 12 years ago, had kept it through everything that followed. A reminder, a promise, a piece of Afghanistan that would never leave her, no matter how far she ran. She picked it up now, felt its familiar weight, traced the white line with one finger. Somewhere in the Pentagon, in Arlington, in towns scattered across America, 12 families went about their lives, never knowing the truth about how their daughters, sisters, mothers had really died. Never knowing that their deaths had been erased, their sacrifices stolen, their names buried under classification stamps and official lies. Sergeant Mallory Grant, Staff Sergeant Brianna Locke, Lieutenant Sarah Cortez, Captain Jennifer Wolfe, Lieutenant Morgan Hayes, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Price, Corporal Amanda Sterling, Specialist Katie Donovan, Sergeant Melissa Warren, Private First Class Christine Valdez, Corporal Rebecca Torres, and one more, Specialist Devin Pierce, male, 23 years old when he died in the snow of Khyber Pass. His last words a question about whether his mother would be proud. 20 names written in Kira's memory like scripture, like prayer, like debts that could never be fully repaid. She set the stone down, lay back on her bunk, and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, another skill honed through necessity. 5 hours of deep rest was sufficient to maintain optimal function. At 200 hours, her eyes would open to darkness, and the next phase would begin. But for now, in the brief window between action and consequence, she allowed herself to remember. Afghanistan, December 2012. The mountains white with fresh snow. The air so cold it burned the lungs. The weight of the rifle in her hands. The faces of people who would be dead within hours. And a choice that would echo through 12 years and 467 lives, leading inexorably to this moment. This ship. This reckoning that had been postponed but never forgotten. The debt was coming due. At 200 hours, Kira's eyes opened to complete darkness. No gradual awakening, no moment of disorientation. 1 second unconscious, the next fully alert. 12 years of operating in hostile territory had rewired her nervous system into something that civilian sleep studies would find fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. The ambient sound of the carrier had changed. Subtle shifts in the ventilation rhythm, different footfall patterns in the corridor outside, the barely perceptible vibration of the deck plates altered by maybe 0.5%. Details most people would never notice. Details that had kept her alive when margins for error were measured in heartbeats. Her secure tablet activated itself on the desk, casting blue light across the small cabin. She was on her feet before the screen fully illuminated, moving silently across the space in bare feet. The message appeared in stark white text against black background. No sender, no subject line, just words that carried the weight of institutional authority and barely concealed panic. Exfil protocol initiated. Primary asset compromise detected. Terminate current assignment. Proceed to extraction point Charlie. Attention Sigma 9, Black Lake. She read it once, committing every word to memory, then watched as the message erased itself, the screen returning to neutral darkness. The authentication code was correct. The timing was not surprising, but the order itself represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what was actually happening aboard the USS Patriot. They thought she was in danger. They thought she needed extraction. They had forgotten what Phantom actually was. A soft knock at her door cut through the silence. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, old field code. Someone who knew protocols from another era. "It's Sterling," came a whispered voice, barely louder than breath. "You need to move. Now." Kira opened the door a crack. Wolf's face filled the narrow space, illuminated by the dim red emergency lighting that ran along the corridor floor. His expression was carved from granite, but his eyes held urgency that decades of military discipline couldn't quite mask. 3 counterintelligence officers boarded during night operations, he said without preamble, his voice pitched to carry no further than necessary. They're checking identification deck by deck, starting from the bridge level, working their way down. Looking for me, specifically? Kira kept her voice equally low. They're carrying your photograph, not the official one from your current file, the old one, from Wraith. Wolf's jaw tightened. This isn't Harrow. He's still in his quarters, probably drinking himself unconscious. This came from higher up. For the first time since boarding the Patriot, something shifted in Kira's expression. Not fear, not surprise. A brief hardening around the eyes that spoke of calculations being made, variables being assessed, decisions crystallizing. "You should return to your quarters, Chief. This isn't your operation." "The hell it isn't." Wolf's voice remained controlled but carried steel underneath. "Your father pulled me out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. Took shrapnel meant for me. I promised him on his deathbed I'd watch over you. I'm not breaking that promise now." Kira studied his face for 3 seconds. The weathered skin, the scars that told stories he would never speak about in daylight. The absolute conviction in eyes that had seen too many promises broken, too many debts left unpaid. "Harrow didn't send them," she said quietly. Wolf's expression shifted. "What?" "Think about it. 3 officers board during night ops, hours after I reveal myself? That's not Harrow's timeline. He's still processing, still trying to understand what my presence means." She glanced down the corridor, calculating. This came from someone who knew I was here before today's inspection. Someone who's been waiting for me to surface. Understanding crossed Wolf's face, followed by something darker. "They were always going to burn you." "They've been trying to burn me for 12 years, Chief. I'm still here." She stepped back into her cabin, moving to what appeared to be a simple wall panel. Her fingers found an almost invisible seam. "How much time do I have?" "They're 4 decks up, maybe 20 minutes if they're being thorough." He paused. "Kira, these aren't regular CI. Lead officer is former Delta Force. They call him Reaper. He doesn't take prisoners." "Good." Kira removed the false panel, revealing a narrow passage into the ship's maintenance infrastructure. Neither do I. Wolf stared at the hidden entrance. How long have you had this? Since my second week aboard. Always have an exit strategy, Chief. You taught me that. She gathered essentials from beneath her bunk. A compact kit, medical supplies, the gray stone with its white line. Everything else was either replaceable or deliberately expendable. I need you to do something for me. Name it. In 6 hours, if I haven't contacted you, there's a data packet in a dead drop location I'll send to your personal device. You take it directly to Commander Juliana Reeves. No one else. Can you do that? Wolf's face showed no surprise at the mention of the XO. She's part of this? She's part of what comes next. Kira paused at the entrance to the maintenance shaft. What happened in Khyber Pass, what Harrow did, it's not isolated. There are 4 others just like him. 5 operations, 5 stolen legacies, 12 people who died so officers could wear stars they didn't earn. Jesus Christ. I'm bringing it into the light, Wolf, all of it, but I need to survive the night first. She slipped into the narrow passage. And I need you safe when the real fight starts, because I'm going to need you to testify. Testify to what? To who I was before they made me into Phantom, to who my father raised me to be. Her voice floated back from the darkness. Someone has to remember that part. Someone has to tell them I wasn't always a weapon. Then she was gone, the panel sliding back into place with a whisper of displaced air, leaving Wolf alone in the corridor with the weight of promises made to dead friends and the terrible knowledge of what was about to unfold. The maintenance shafts of a Nimitz-class carrier formed a labyrinth that most crew members never saw, never thought about. Narrow passages threading between decks, through bulkheads, around critical systems, infrastructure invisible to the ship's normal operations, but essential to its function. Kira moved through the darkness with confidence born of 8 months of careful exploration. She had mapped every junction, every access point, every route between vital areas, had committed it all to memory during her first weeks aboard, knowing that this moment, or something like it, was inevitable. The shaft was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Pipes ran along one side, conduits along the other. The air was close, warm, thick with the smell of metal and machinery. She moved in complete darkness, navigating by touch and spatial memory, her breathing controlled and silent. Behind her, distant sounds. Voices raised in military authority, doors being opened, the methodical progress of a search conducted by professionals who knew their business. They were thorough, they were trained, but they were searching a ship that Kira had spent 8 months learning to disappear inside. She changed direction, moving deeper into the infrastructure toward the ship's communication center. If someone was coordinating a hunt for her, that was where the operational nerve center would be. She needed information before anything else, needed to understand exactly who was pulling strings and why. More importantly, she needed to understand what they thought they knew about her current mission, because if they had compromised her assignment, then they knew about Operation Clean Sweep, which meant they knew about the other 4 officers, which meant this was bigger than just burying one ghost who refused to stay dead. The communications center was 3 decks down and forward, deep in the carrier's protected core. She moved through access tunnels most crew didn't know existed, past junction boxes and relay stations, following routes she had memorized in the dark, specifically for moments like this. 15 minutes of careful movement brought her to a ventilation grate overlooking the comm center. She positioned herself in the shadows above, perfectly still, and watched. 3 men in dark uniforms without insignia moved between terminals. The lead officer was exactly as Wolf had described. Mid-40s, scarred hands, eyes that tracked everything with predator awareness. Reaper. She recognized the type, had worked with men like him, had put some of them in the ground when circumstances required it. He approached the duty officer, a young ensign who looked barely old enough to vote, Certainly too young to be working the night shift on a classified communication system. We need access to secure Channel 7, Reaper said. His voice was flat, professional, the kind of tone that expected immediate compliance. Admiral's private channel. The ensign's face showed confusion mixed with the automatic deference junior personnel showed to anyone projecting authority. Sir, that's the Admiral's private channel. I don't have authorization to grant access without direct orders from... We have authorization. Reaper slid a signed order across the console. The ensign studied it, uncertainty clear in every line of his posture. The signature was Harrow's. The classification markings were correct, but something about the situation clearly troubled him. As the terminal activated, the overhead lights suddenly cut out. Complete darkness engulfed the communication center, except for the blue glow of monitors. Emergency lighting flickered on after 3 seconds, casting everything in deep crimson that turned faces into masks and shadows into potential threats. "Security breach," one of Reaper's men said, his hand moving toward his sidearm. The words died as Kira dropped from the ventilation shaft, moving with speed that defied the limited light. The first officer registered only a blur before finding himself face down on the deck, his arm twisted into an immobilization hold that caused pain without permanent damage. Precise, controlled, exactly enough force. The second officer reached for his weapon, but Kira's fingers found the nerve cluster at his neck before the pistol cleared its holster. He went rigid, muscles locked, unable to move or cry out. Reaper had time to turn, to begin processing the threat, before a calculated strike to his solar plexus doubled him over. A follow-up blow to the back of his neck sent him to the deck, unconscious. 7 seconds from entry to neutralization. No wasted movement, no unnecessary force, no permanent damage unless absolutely required. The terrified ensign raised his hands, his face pale in the red emergency lighting. "Please, I'm just..." "Relax, ensign." Kira's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as she moved to the terminal. "I'm not here for you." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through security protocols with practiced efficiency. Classified channels opened, revealing layers of information invisible to standard personnel. She worked with absolute focus, ignoring the 3 unconscious men, ignoring the ensign who stood frozen in shock, ignoring everything except the data flowing across the screen. "You have 2 choices," she said without looking away from her work. "Stay and observe, becoming a witness to classified information that will complicate your life considerably. Or walk out that door, report that you were temporarily relieved of duty by senior personnel, and maintain plausible deniability." The ensign hesitated. "Who are you?" "Someone trying to correct a mistake." She glanced at his name tag. "Ensign Matthews. Some questions are safer left unasked." Matthews stood, straightening his uniform with hands that shook noticeably. "I'll report the counterintelligence presence as ordered, ma'am." He paused at the door. "But ma'am, they're killing the power section by section. You don't have much time." "I never do, ensign. Thank you." As the door closed behind him, Kira continued her search through secured files. Documents flashed across the screen. Mission reports, personnel files, classification stamps in red and black, names redacted into meaningless bars. And finally, video footage labeled Khyber Pass, Operation Command Review, Classified. She copied the file to a secure drive, then continued searching. 5 operations over 10 years. 5 senior officers whose careers were built on stolen valor and buried bodies. But the pattern went deeper than individual corruption. Operation Sandstorm, Syria, 2015. Major General Marcus Blackburn credited with eliminating a high-value target. Actual operator, Lieutenant Sarah Cortez. Status, KIA, unrelated training accident, 2016. Operation Dark Horizon, Yemen, 2017. Admiral Patricia Cromwell credited with intelligence coup that prevented terrorist attack. Actual operator, Captain Jennifer Wolfe. Status: KIA, vehicle accident, 2018. Operation Silent Blade, Libya, 2019. Colonel Garrett Thorne credited with precision strike against weapons facility. Actual operator, First Lieutenant Morgan Hayes. Status: KIA, parachute malfunction, 2019. Operation Ghost Protocol, Somalia, 2020. Brigadier General Helena Voss credited with hostage rescue. Actual operator, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Price. Status: KIA, drowning during training exercise, 2021. A pattern so obvious it screamed intentionality. Female operators deployed on black operations. Missions completed successfully. Credit transferred to male commanders. Operators subsequently killed in accidents too convenient to believe. 12 people total across 5 operations. 12 families told their loved ones died in training accidents or off-duty incidents. 12 funerals with full military honors and lies carved into marble headstones. The rage that burned through Kira's chest was cold, controlled, turned into fuel rather than allowed to explode into recklessness. This was why she had agreed to Operation Clean Sweep. This was why she had allowed herself to be sent back into the light after years in the darkness. She kept searching. There had to be a connection, a central authorization, someone who had orchestrated this systematic erasure of inconvenient witnesses. The file appeared buried 3 layers deep under classification stamps that technically shouldn't exist. Project Wraith, operational parameters, architect authorization required. She bypassed the security in 40 seconds. The encryption was good, but not good enough. Not for someone who had spent 12 years learning to break into places she wasn't supposed to exist. The file opened. Her breath caught despite years of training herself not to react. Authorized by Nathaniel Cross, Deputy Director, National Intelligence, Operational Scope, 2010 to 2024. Purpose: development of expendable assets for maximum deniability operations. Personnel: Special Operations Qualified, no immediate family or minimal family connections. Disposition: termination following mission completion to ensure operational security. The clinical language made it worse somehow. Expendable assets, disposition, termination, words that turned human beings into accounting entries, lives into liabilities to be balanced and eliminated. But there was more. A subfile labeled Khyber Pass Special Notation. She opened it, began reading, and felt the foundation of her understanding shift. Khyber Pass Mission Compromise. Source identified. Major Theodore Kane, Operational Planning Cell. Kane provided Taliban forces with mission password extraction timing and personnel roster. Purpose: eliminate Task Force Sentinel to prevent discovery of Kane's unauthorized intelligence sharing with foreign assets. 4 deaths directly attributable to Kane betrayal. Commander Harrow, aware of Kane involvement, chose to suppress evidence in exchange for Kane's assistance in securing Harrow's subsequent promotions. Lieutenant Ashford's abandonment served dual purpose: eliminate witness to Kane's treason and provide Harrow with heroic narrative for career advancement. The words blurred slightly as Kira processed their meaning. Sergeant Mallory Grant, Staff Sergeant Brianna Locke, Corporal Jackson Hayes, Specialist Devin Pierce. 4 people she had watched die in the snow and ice. 4 deaths that weren't operational casualties or bad luck or the inevitable cost of war. 4 murders orchestrated by a traitor from within. And Harrow had known, had chosen silence over justice, had chosen his career over their lives. The rage turned from cold to absolute zero, the kind of fury that burned everything else away, leaving only crystalline purpose. She downloaded everything, every file, every classified document, every piece of evidence that 12 years of institutional cover-up had tried to bury. Then she accessed the ship's internal communication system and began preparations for something that would end careers and destroy carefully constructed lies. The emergency lighting suddenly stabilized, returning to normal illumination. Somewhere above, Reaper and his team were waking up, discovering their failure, reporting that Phantom was loose in the ship. But by then, Kira had already disappeared back into the maintenance infrastructure, carrying with her the truth about 12 people whose deaths had bought 5 officers their stars and 1 deputy director his power. She moved through the dark passages, her mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and consequences and the precise moment when silence would transform into revelation. In his quarters, Admiral Vincent Harrow sat at his desk, staring at a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched. The secure phone beside it remained silent, but he knew it would ring soon. Knew that the night's events were spinning beyond his ability to control them. He had spent 12 years building a career on a foundation of lies. 12 years sleeping soundly by telling himself that the mission had been completed, that the intelligence had been secured, that difficult decisions had been made by people far above his pay grade. 12 years pretending he didn't remember a 22-year-old lieutenant dragging him through snow while blood poured from wounds in his chest and leg. Didn't remember her refusing his direct order to abandon him. Didn't remember watching her turn back toward the sounds of gunfire, alone, while the helicopter carried him to safety. The phone rang. He picked it up on the second ring. "Harrow, she's in the wind." Reaper's voice was clipped, professional, but underneath ran a current of something that might have been respect or might have been fear. "Neutralize my entire team without lethal force, accessed the classified network, and disappeared. Sir, whoever trained this operator knew what they were doing. I know who trained her." Harrow's eyes fixed on a photograph on his desk. A much younger version of himself standing beside Colonel Nathaniel Ashford, both men in desert camouflage, both smiling with the easy confidence of people who still believed the world made sense. Her father was the best combat officer I ever served with. She learned from the best before she learned from the worst. "Your orders, sir?" Harrow was silent for a long moment. "Stand down." "Sir?" "You heard me. Stand down. Return to your quarters. File your report in the morning. Tell them you were unable to locate the subject." "Admiral, with respect, I have direct orders from—" "I know who gave you your orders, Reaper, and I'm countermanding them. This is my ship. These are my people, and this ends now." He paused. "That's not a request." The line went dead. Harrow set down the phone and picked up the bourbon. This time he drank, feeling the burn, welcoming it. His career was over. He had known it the moment Kira spoke her call sign in the inspection room. Known that 12 years of borrowed glory were coming due, that debts postponed would be collected with interest, that ghosts didn't stay buried when someone kept digging. But perhaps there was still time to do one thing right, one choice that might balance some infinitesimal fraction of the weight on his conscience. He opened his desk drawer, removed a key, and unlocked a small safe built into the bulkhead. Inside lay a USB drive he had kept for 12 years, telling himself it was insurance, knowing it was cowardice given physical form. The drive contained his own copy of the Khyber Pass footage. The real footage, before it had been edited, before the narrative had been carefully constructed. The version that showed exactly who had held that mountain pass and why. He had kept it as leverage, as protection against the day when someone might question his version of events. But leverage only worked if you were willing to use it. Protection only mattered if you valued what you were protecting. Kira Ashford had already decided that truth was worth more than safety. The least he could do was stop standing in her way. He placed the drive in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote a name on the outside in careful block letters. Commander Juliana Reeves. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and walked out into the corridor. It was time to choose which side of history he wanted to stand on. In the senior enlisted mess, Wolf sat with his cold coffee in his older memories. Around him, the morning shift began to filter in, sailors grabbing quick meals before their watches began. The normal rhythm of carrier life, oblivious to the small war being fought in the shadows. Chief Petty Officer Jackson Murdoch appeared, carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee. He set one in front of Wolf without asking, then sat down heavily. "The word is out," Murdoch said quietly. 3 CI officers found unconscious in the comm center. Security protocols triggered. Phantoms gone to ground somewhere in the ship. He paused. "Some of the men are saying we should help them find her. Others are saying we should make sure they don't." "What are you saying, Chief?" Murdoch stared into his coffee. "I'm saying I've been in the Navy for 16 years. I've served under good officers and bad ones. I've followed orders I agreed with and orders I didn't. But I've never been asked to hunt down someone who has a 467 count for doing their job too well." He looked up. "What's the right call here, Wolf?" "The right call is to remember why we put on the uniform in the first place." Wolf's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of 40 years of service. "We took an oath to defend the Constitution, to protect and serve, not to cover up convenient lies or hunt down people who tell inconvenient truths. Even if it costs us our careers? Especially then. That's when the oath matters most." Murdoch absorbed this in silence. Then, "What do you need?" Wolf pulled out his phone, checked the secure message that had appeared 10 minutes ago with a location and a simple instruction. "I need 8 good people. People who remember what honor means. People who can keep their mouths shut and their spines straight when pressure gets applied." "I can get you 8, Murdoch stood. "What are we doing?" "Something that should have been done 12 years ago." Wolf stood as well, leaving the untouched coffee behind. "We're telling the truth." Deep in the maintenance infrastructure, Kira sat in a junction space barely large enough for her to stretch out. Around her, pipes thrummed with the ship's vital fluids. Conduits carried electricity and data. The machinery of war continued its endless operation, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in its steel corridors. She held the gray stone, turning it slowly in her hands, studying the white line in the dim glow of her tablet screen. The stone had been beside Sergeant Mallory Grant's body when Kira had crawled back through the snow to retrieve dog tags and weapons and anything that might identify the dead to their families. Mallory had been 26, had served 3 tours, had talked constantly about her son back home, about teaching him to fish and to ride a bike, and to be kind in a world that didn't always reward kindness. Mallory had taken a round meant for Kira, had pushed the younger lieutenant out of the line of fire, had died so someone else could live. And her reward had been a training accident notation in some file. Her sacrifice erased, her son told a lie about how his mother died. Kira had carried the stone through 12 years of missions and lies, had promised herself that one day she would find a way to tell the truth, to make the deaths mean something, to ensure that when people said the names of the fallen, they spoke the real story instead of comfortable fictions. That day had arrived. She set down the stone and pulled up the files she had stolen from the comm center. Hours of work ahead, compiling evidence, building an unassailable case, preparing to burn down 12 years of carefully constructed mythology. But first, she needed to understand one more thing. She opened the file on Theodore Kane, the man who had betrayed Khyber Pass, who had sent 4 operators to their deaths, for reasons still not entirely clear from the documentation. Major Theodore Kane, now General Kane, stationed at the Pentagon, counterintelligence specialist, access to the highest levels of classified operations, and according to the files, the one person besides Nathaniel Cross who knew the full scope of Project Wraith. The connection crystallized. Kane hadn't just betrayed one mission. He had been part of the architecture of betrayal from the beginning, had helped Cross identify which operators to designate as expendable, had helped arrange the convenient accidents that followed successful missions. And Kane knew that Kira knew, which meant the kill order hadn't come from Harrow's panic. It had come from Kane's calculation that Phantom represented an existential threat to the entire conspiracy. Her tablet buzzed with an incoming message. Wolf's secured channel. A single line of text. Package delivered to Reeves. She knows everything. Says to proceed. We have your back. Kira allowed herself a small smile in the darkness. The pieces were moving into position. Wolf had his testimony ready. Reeves had the evidence. And Kira had one more card to play that would force every rat out of hiding and into the light. She began typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with purpose and precision. The message she was composing would go to every terminal on the USS Patriot simultaneously, would be transmitted via secured channels to CENTCOM, to the Pentagon, to JSOC headquarters, would appear on the screens of generals and admirals, of SEC-NAV and SEC-DEF, of people who had spent years pretending certain truths didn't exist. The truth couldn't be killed. It couldn't be buried. It could only be postponed. And Phantom had come to collect what was owed, in full, with 12 years of interest compounded into something that would shatter careers and rewrite histories and force people to remember names they had tried so hard to forget. Her fingers paused over the keyboard, one keystroke away from irrevocable action, one decision away from burning every bridge and breaking every cover and stepping fully into the light for the first time since she had died officially in Caracas 6 years ago. Mallory Grant would have wanted the truth. Brianna Locke would have demanded it. Jackson Hayes and Devin Pierce had died believing their sacrifice meant something. 12 people across 12 years deserve better than convenient lies and covered-up murders. Kira's finger pressed down. The message sent. And somewhere in the darkness of the maintenance shaft, Phantom smiled like a blade being drawn from its sheath, ready to cut through years of comfortable lies and let the truth bleed out for all to see. The first screen flickered at 0427 hours in the officer's mess. A sailor eating breakfast looked up from his tray, confusion crossing his face as the mounted display went dark, then blazed back to life with an image that shouldn't exist on an unclassified system. Snow, mountains, blood. Within 30 seconds, every screen on the USS Patriot displayed the same footage. In crew berthing areas, sailors stirred from sleep to find their personal devices streaming video they hadn't requested. In the Combat Information Center, tactical displays went dark and were replaced by helmet camera footage 12 years old. On the bridge, navigation systems flickered and gave way to classified combat recordings that made the watch officer reach for a phone with shaking hands. 5,000 personnel spread across 1,000 feet of nuclear-powered warship, suddenly watching the same truth unfold in high definition. The footage began with a tactical briefing. 16 operators gathered in a forward operating base in Afghanistan, December 2012. A young lieutenant with dark hair pulled back, her face lean and focused, listening as a commander outlined the mission parameters. Extract high-value intelligence from a Taliban stronghold. Secure the package. Exfiltrate to designated landing zone. Simple, clean, routine. The video jumped forward, combat footage now, shaky and chaotic. The helmet cam showed a mountain pass, narrow and steep, rocky walls rising on both sides. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions. An IED detonated, the camera shaking violently. When the image stabilized, 4 bodies lay motionless in the snow. The carrier's crew watched in absolute silence as the ambush unfolded. Watched as the remaining operators returned fire, fought their way toward an extraction point that seemed impossibly distant. Watched as more fell wounded, as ammunition ran low, as a young commander with blood streaming down his face screamed orders into a radio. Then the helicopter arrived. Not enough room for everyone, not enough time to wait for a second bird. The commander, badly wounded, being loaded aboard. Other casualties following. The intelligence package secured in a waterproof case. And through it all, visible in the background, a single operator providing covering fire with methodical precision. Each shot deliberate, each target selected with perfect tactical awareness. Buying seconds with bullets, buying lives with violence delivered with surgical exactness. The audio came through crystal clear despite the wind and gunfire. Commander Vincent Harrow's voice, strained with pain, but absolutely certain in its conviction. No extraction for Ghost. Mission parameters remain. Pass must be held regardless of casualties. That's a direct order. The helicopter began to lift off. The camera swung wildly, showing the interior of the aircraft. The wounded, the terrified faces of operators who had just watched their teammates die. Then it swung back toward the landing zone. The lone figure stood in the snow, rifle coming up to firing position, as the helicopter rose into gray sky in banking snow. The camera caught her face for just a moment. 22 years old, utterly calm, already tracking targets that hadn't yet appeared. Lieutenant Kira Ashford, call sign Phantom. The video continued for 6 hours compressed into 17 minutes of edited highlights. The crew of the USS Patriot watched her hold that pass alone, watched her use terrain and patience and skills that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Watched the Taliban assault break against her position like water against stone, each wave leaving more bodies cooling in the snow. 42 confirmed eliminations. The counter in the corner of the screen climbed with metronomic regularity. 42 human beings who had walked into that pass alive and would never walk out. But the video didn't stop there. It continued past the 6-hour mark Harrow had reported. Showed Phantom leaving her defensive position, moving back through the killing ground, checking bodies, collecting dog tags from 4 fallen Americans, securing their weapons, treating them with a reverence that the footage made impossibly poignant. Then she did something that made several watching sailors actually gasp aloud. She went back for Harrow's blood trail, followed it to where he had fallen before being loaded onto the helicopter, found his dog tag in the snow where it had been ripped away by shrapnel, collected it with the same care she had shown the confirmed dead. The final sequence showed her 12 hours after abandonment, staggering through snow toward an alternate extraction point, carrying 60 pounds of equipment, plus the intelligence package, plus 4 sets of dog tags, plus evidence of treason she had recovered from the Taliban commander's body. The video ended with a black screen and white text. Lieutenant Kira Ashford, designated Phantom, held Khyber Pass for 6 hours 17 minutes. 42 confirmed eliminations. 0 friendly casualties after helicopter extraction. Mission successful. Intelligence secured. Fallen recovered. Official after-action report credited Commander Vincent Harrow with heroic defense of Khyber Pass. Lieutenant Ashford listed as killed in action, unrelated operation, classified. This is one of 12 operations where operators completed missions successfully, had credit transferred to commanders, and were subsequently eliminated to ensure operational security. Their names were Kira Ashford, Sarah Cortez, Jennifer Wolfe, Morgan Hayes, Rachel Price, Mallory Grant, Brianna Locke, Amanda Sterling, Katie Donovan, Melissa Warren, Christine Valdez, Rebecca Torres. This systematic erasure was authorized by Deputy Director Nathaniel Cross, National Intelligence. Operational betrayal at Khyber Pass was conducted by Major Theodore Kane, now General Kane, Pentagon Counterintelligence. The truth has been buried for 12 years. Today, it comes to light. The screens went dark. Normal systems resumed. But across the USS Patriot, 5,000 people sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. In officer country, Admiral Vincent Harrow stood in his cabin, staring at the blank screen, his face completely drained of color. The tablet slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered to the deck. His carefully constructed world, his decorated career, his stolen valor, all of it crumbling like sandcastles before an incoming tide. On the bridge, Commander Juliana Reeves moved with swift purpose. her face set in lines of professional fury. She had known this moment was coming, had helped orchestrate it, but seeing the evidence laid bare still hit with physical force. "Get me SECNAV on Secure Line 1, she ordered. "Priority Alpha Override. I don't care what time it is in Washington, wake him up." In crew berthing, young sailors looked at each other with expressions that ranged from shock to rage to something approaching reverence. In the chief's mess, senior NCOs sat in heavy silence, the weight of institutional betrayal settling onto shoulders that had carried many burdens, but never quite this one. And in the maintenance shaft 3 decks below the waterline, Kira Ashford disconnected her tablet from the ship's network, carefully packed her equipment, and prepared to step out of the shadows for the final time. The bridge of the USS Patriot hummed with controlled chaos. Officers moved between stations with urgent purpose. Phones rang constantly. Secure data links flashed with incoming traffic from CENTCOM, from the Pentagon, from the White House Situation Room itself. Commander Reeves stood at the center of it all, her face calm, but her eyes tracking everything with absolute focus. 45 years old, 22 years in the Navy, and she had never seen anything quite like this. Had never been part of something that would rewrite careers and reopen wounds and force institutions to confront truths they had spent years burying. The heavy door opened. Admiral Harrow entered, still in his dress uniform despite the early hour. But something fundamental had changed in his bearing. The confident authority was gone, replaced by something that looked like acceptance of inevitable consequences. "Commander," he said quietly, "I believe you have orders for me." Reeves pulled a sealed envelope from her jacket. "Admiral Vincent Harrow, I have orders from the Secretary of the Navy to relieve you of command, effective immediately, pending investigation into charges of falsification of after-action reports, misappropriation of classified resources, and conspiracy to cover up war crimes." 2 Marine Guards entered, taking positions on either side of the Admiral. Harrow didn't resist, didn't protest. He simply nodded once, a gesture that carried the weight of 12 years of lies finally collapsing. "On what grounds?" The question came from the XO, a commander who had served under Harrow for 2 years and was now watching his world reorganize itself in real time. Reeves looked past Harrow to the gathered bridge crew. "On the grounds that we've all just watched evidence of systematic institutional betrayal. On the grounds that 12 people were murdered to protect careers and bury inconvenient truths. On the grounds that we took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and that includes defending it against enemies, foreign and domestic." The bridge fell silent. The words hung in the air like an indictment of everyone who had ever looked the other way. Everyone who had ever accepted a convenient lie over an uncomfortable truth. "Where is Captain Ashford?" Harrow asked quietly. "Right here, Admiral." Every head turned. Kira stood in the doorway, flanked by Master Chief Sterling and Chief Petty Officer Murdoch. Behind them, 8 SEALs from the unit Harrow had commanded. Their presence was a statement that needed no explanation. She had changed into a fresh uniform, had taken time to make herself presentable, professional, every inch the officer she had been before Task Force Wraith had turned her into a ghost. But her eyes carried the weight of 12 years in the darkness, 12 years of missions that officially never happened, 12 years of being a weapon instead of a person. "Permission to approach, Commander?" Kira asked formally. "Granted." Kira walked across the bridge with Wolf at her shoulder. She stopped 3 feet from Harrow, came to attention, held his gaze without flinching. "I kept this," she said, pulling a worn, blood-stained dog tag from her pocket. "Your tag, from Khyber Pass. I kept it to remind myself that sometimes the people we save don't deserve it." Harrow stared at the metal rectangle, at his own name stamped into steel that had been torn from his neck by shrapnel, at physical evidence of a debt he had tried to forget. "I would like to officially revise my report on the Khyber Pass operation," he said, his voice breaking slightly. Every eye on the bridge locked onto him. The official record states that I held the pass through superior tactical command. That is false. He took a breath, steadied himself. Lieutenant Ashford held the pass alone for 6 hours, 17 minutes. She did so after dragging me, wounded, back to the extraction zone. After I ordered her to abandon me and complete the mission, she refused that order, saved my life, returned me to the helicopter, and then, against direct orders, turned back to secure both the intelligence package and the remains of our fallen. The silence on the bridge was absolute. I am not a hero, Harrow continued, and now tears ran openly down his weathered face. I am a coward who built a career on a lie, who let a 22-year-old do what I couldn't do, and then took credit for her sacrifice. He removed his Admiral stars with shaking hands and placed them on the tactical table between himself and Kira. I hereby resign my commission, effective immediately, and submit myself for whatever disciplinary action is deemed appropriate. Kira picked up the stars, studied them for a moment, then held them out to Harrow. Keep them, Admiral. Remember what they cost, because you're not the only one who needs to answer for what happened. You're just the first. The implications settled over the bridge like heavy weather. This wasn't ending, this was beginning. The secure phone on the commander station began flashing. Priority override, direct line from Washington. Reeves picked it up, her voice professionally neutral. Commander Reeves, USS Patriot. She listened for 30 seconds, her expression never changing, then held the phone out toward the main display. Mr. Secretary, you're on speaker. Captain Ashford is present, as requested. The screen flickered to life. Secretary of the Navy, Arthur Morrison, appeared, looking like a man who had been woken from sleep and dragged into a nightmare. 72 years old, he had the kind of face that had seen too much to be shocked easily. But his eyes, when they found Kira across the video link, showed something approaching shock nonetheless. Captain Ashford, he said, Phantom. Mr. Secretary, I've just spent the last hour watching footage that apparently everyone in the Pacific Fleet has also seen. Footage that indicates systematic corruption at the highest levels of our special operations community. He paused. I've also received 17 resignation letters from flag officers in the last 20 minutes, and approximately 47 calls from members of Congress demanding explanations I don't have. With respect, sir, you have the explanations. You just haven't wanted to look at them for 12 years. Morrison's jaw tightened. That may be true, but what happens now, Captain, is going to determine whether we clean house or burn it down entirely. I need to know your intentions. My intentions are simple, Mr. Secretary. Full disclosure of Project Wraith. Posthumous recognition and honors for all 12 operators who were murdered to maintain operational security. Notification of families with accurate information about how their loved ones actually died. Criminal prosecution of Deputy Director Cross and General Kane for their roles in orchestrating and executing this program. You're asking me to tear apart the intelligence community. No, sir. I'm asking you to hold it accountable. There's a difference. Morrison studied her through the video link for a long moment. And if I refuse? Then in 8 hours, the Washington Post publishes everything. Every operation, every cover-up, every name. And you spend the rest of your term managing the fallout instead of leading the Navy. The silence stretched for 15 seconds. Morrison's face worked through several expressions before settling into something that looked like respect, mixed with resignation. I'll make the call to the Attorney General, he said finally. But Captain, this is going to get ugly. Cross has friends at the highest levels. Kane is connected throughout the intelligence community. They're going to fight this with everything they have. Let them fight, sir. I've been fighting for 12 years. I'm not stopping now. Very well. Morrison's eyes shifted to Harrow, standing at attention with his Marines. Admiral Harrow will be transferred to shore immediately for questioning. Commander Reeves, you have operational command of the Patriot until a permanent replacement is designated. And Captain Ashford, sir, For what it's worth, your father would be proud. Colonel Ashford was one of the finest officers I ever served with. I can see you learned well. Something flickered across Kira's face, the first crack in her professional composure. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. The connection ended. The bridge remained silent for a long moment, everyone processing the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Then Wolf stepped forward, his weathered face showing emotion for the first time since the crisis began. Captain Ashford, it's been an honor to serve with you again. The honor was mine, Chief. You kept your promise to my father. That debt is paid in full. No, ma'am, the debt was mine to him. You've given me something else entirely, a chance to be part of something that matters, a chance to tell the truth after too many years of silence. He came to attention, rendered a salute that was absolute perfection. Thank you for that. Kira returned the salute, and for just a moment, the entire bridge saw not the ghost who had killed 467 people, not the weapon that Task Force Wraith had forged, but a 34-year-old woman who had carried impossible burdens and survived when survival seemed impossible. The Marines led Harrow away. The bridge crew returned to their stations. The sun began to rise over the Pacific, painting the flight deck in shades of gold and red. And in the spaces between the bustle of normal operations resuming, in the quiet conversations and the looks exchanged between sailors who had just witnessed history being rewritten, a new understanding began to take root. The Navy had failed these people. The institution had betrayed them. But one of them had refused to stay buried, had clawed her way back to the light, and had forced everyone to confront truths that were uncomfortable and necessary in equal measure. 2 weeks after the broadcast, Kira stood in a Pentagon briefing room facing a panel of 7 generals and admirals. The Article 32 hearing for General Theodore Kane was about to begin. Kane sat at the defense table, his uniform stripped of rank insignia, his face a mask of controlled rage. When his eyes met Kira's, she saw no remorse, only hatred for the ghost who refused to stay buried. Captain Ashford, the presiding officer began, you have been called as the primary witness in the court-martial of General Theodore Kane on charges of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Do you swear to tell the truth? I do, sir. For 3 hours she testified about Khyber Pass, about the encrypted radio found on the Taliban commander's body, about the 16 operators who had walked into an ambush Kane had orchestrated, about Mallory Grant pushing her out of the line of fire, about watching 4 people die because someone had sold them out for reasons she still didn't fully understand. Kane's defense attorney tried to break her, tried to discredit her testimony, tried to paint her as a rogue operator with a vendetta. But Kira had spent 12 years operating in hostile territory. A hostile courtroom was nothing compared to a hostile mountain pass. When she finished, the panel sat in silence. Then the presiding officer spoke. General Kane, do you wish to make a statement? Kane stood. For a moment, Kira thought he might actually confess, might finally explain why 16 lives were worth whatever he had gained from his betrayal. Instead, he said, I invoke my right to remain silent. Cowardice, Kira thought, came in many forms. Sometimes it wore stars. The hearing adjourned. As Kira left the room, Wolf waited in the corridor. How do you feel? He asked. Like I can finally breathe, she said, for the first time in 12 years. 3 months later, Arlington National Cemetery lay quiet under autumn sun. Leaves turned gold and red on the trees that lined the white headstones. A crowd had gathered at Section 60, where the most recent casualties of America's wars found their final rest. 12 new markers stood in a row, each bearing a name that had been forgotten, deliberately erased, buried under classification stamps and convenient lies. The markers were simple, dignified, and absolutely honest. Sergeant Mallory Grant, United States Army, killed in action, Operation Khyber Pass, Afghanistan, 2012. Medal of Honor, posthumous. Staff Sergeant Breonna Locke, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, Operation Khyber Pass, Afghanistan, 2012. Navy Cross, posthumous. Corporal Jackson Hayes, United States Army, killed in action, Operation Khyber Pass, Afghanistan, 2012. Silver Star, posthumous. Specialist Devin Pierce, United States Army, killed in action, Operation Khyber Pass, Afghanistan, 2012. Bronze Star with Valor, posthumous. Lieutenant Sarah Cortez, United States Army, killed in action, Operation Sandstorm, Syria, 2015. Distinguished Service Cross, posthumous. Captain Jennifer Wolfe, United States Navy, killed in action, Operation Dark Horizon, Yemen, 2017. Navy Cross, posthumous. First Lieutenant Morgan Hayes, United States Air Force, killed in action, Operation Silent Blade, Libya, 2019. Air Force Cross, posthumous. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Price, United States Navy, killed in action, Operation Ghost Protocol, Somalia, 2020. Navy Cross, posthumous. Corporal Amanda Sterling, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, Operation Sandstorm, Syria, 2015. Silver Star, posthumous. Specialist Katie Donovan, United States Army, killed in action, Operation Dark Horizon, Yemen, 2017. Bronze Star with Valor, posthumous. Sergeant Melissa Warren, United States Army, killed in action, Operation Silent Blade, Libya, 2019. Silver Star, posthumous. Private First Class Christine Valdez, United States Army, killed in action, Operation Ghost Protocol, Somalia, 2020. Bronze Star with Valor, posthumous. Corporal Rebecca Torres, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, Operation Ghost Protocol, Somalia, 2020. Silver Star, posthumous. 13 names, 13 truths finally spoken aloud. Kira stood in dress blues before Mallory Grant's marker, her face composed but her eyes carrying weight that no amount of time would ever fully lift. Beside her, a teenage boy with his mother's eyes and his father's nervous energy shifted from foot to foot. "She talked about you," Ethan Grant said quietly. "In her letters, she said if anything happened, I should find Phantom. She said Phantom was the bravest person she knew." Kira's composure cracked. "Just slightly. Just enough. Your mother was braver. She pushed me out of the way when a sniper had me dead to rights. She saved my life twice in 6 hours. I wouldn't be standing here without her." Ethan pulled something from his pocket, a photograph worn and creased from 12 years of handling. His mother in uniform, smiling, alive. "Will you tell me the real story? Not the training accident lie, the truth about what she did?" "Yes." Kira's voice was firm despite the tears now running freely down her face. "You deserve to know who your mother really was, what she accomplished, how she died a warrior and a hero, not a training statistic." Wolf stood at a respectful distance, his dress uniform perfect, his face weathered by decades but his eyes clear. Around them, other families gathered at the other markers, daughters who had never known their mothers, sons who had been told lies, parents who had buried children under false pretenses and were only now learning the truth. Commander Reeves approached, her own dress uniform marking her new position as captain of the USS Patriot. "The ceremony is about to begin. Mr. Secretary is here. So is the President." Kira turned, saw the crowd gathering, generals and admirals, members of Congress, media with their cameras carefully positioned outside the immediate ceremony space. And in the front row, family members of the 13 gathered together in shared grief and shared pride. The President spoke. His words were carefully chosen, acknowledging institutional failure while celebrating individual sacrifice. He spoke of accountability and reform, of lessons learned and promises to do better. But the words that mattered came from the families themselves, when each stood and spoke about the people they had lost, and the lies they had been told, and the pride they felt now knowing the truth. When it was Ethan's turn, he stood before the microphone with teenage awkwardness, but his voice carried clearly across the assembled crowd. My mom was Sergeant Mallory Grant. I was 2 when she died. I was told she died in a training accident, that she fell wrong during an exercise, that it was quick and painless and meaningless. He paused, gathering himself. But my mom didn't die in an accident. She died saving someone's life. She died completing a mission that mattered. She died a hero who saved more people than I can count. His eyes found Kira in the crowd. Captain Ashford told me the truth. She told me my mom was brave and skilled, and that when it mattered most, she chose to save someone else instead of saving herself. That's who my mom was. That's what she deserves to be remembered for. The ceremony ended. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, as though leaving might somehow diminish the importance of what had just occurred. Kira walked alone among the headstones until she reached a marker in an older section. Colonel Nathaniel Ashford, killed in action in Fallujah, 2006. Her father, who had taught her to shoot and to think and to never abandon her principles, even when convenience beckoned. She knelt beside the marker, placed her captain's bars on the stone. Mission complete, Dad. They know the truth now. Mallory and Brianna and the others, they're finally recognized for who they really were. She removed the phantom call sign patch from her uniform, the symbol of 12 years living as a ghost, as a weapon, as something less than human. She dug a small hole beside the headstone and buried it, covering it with earth and autumn leaves. I'm done being a ghost, she said quietly. Time to figure out who Kira Ashford is when she's not hunting or hiding or fighting. Wolf appeared beside her, his presence quiet and unobtrusive. Your father was my best friend, saved my life more times than I can count. I promised him I'd look after you. You kept that promise, Chief, beyond what anyone could expect. Not Chief anymore, retired last week. He smiled slightly. Figured it was time to step back, let the next generation take over. But before I go, I wanted to make sure you were okay. Kira stood, brushed dirt from her knees. I'm not sure I know what okay looks like anymore. 12 years of missions and lies and living in the dark. I don't know who I am without all that. You're your father's daughter. That's enough to start with. They walked together toward the cemetery gate, passing thousands of white markers, each representing a life given in service, a family forever altered, a story that deserved to be remembered truthfully. Kira's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, saw the unknown number, saw the message that made her stop walking. Phantom. 3 operatives still alive in Russian prison. Yemen Operation Survivors. We need you. New mission. You choose. She stared at the message for long seconds. The pull was immediate and familiar. The need to act, to save, to complete the mission. 12 years of conditioning didn't disappear just because she had decided to step into the light. But something else was different now. She wasn't a ghost anymore. Wasn't an expendable asset operating in the dark with no accountability and no choice. She was Captain Kira Ashford, publicly recognized, officially alive, finally free to make her own decisions. She looked at Wolf. 3 operatives from the Yemen operation, still alive in Russian custody. They want me to go get them. What are you going to do? Kira thought about Mallory Grant, pushing her out of the way of a bullet, about Brianna Locke, holding defensive position while others evacuated, about 13 people who had done impossible things because someone needed to, and they had the skills and the courage to try. She thought about Ethan Grant, finally knowing the truth about his mother, about families gathered around markers, crying and proud in equal measure, about the power of truth spoken aloud, instead of buried in classified files. She looked at the message again, thought about 3 operators somewhere in a Russian prison, forgotten, abandoned, waiting for rescue that might never come. Then she deleted the message. But she saved the number, labeled it, maybe later. "Right now," she said to Wolf, "I'm going to visit my sister. Lisa's waiting at a coffee shop in Georgetown with her son James. Going to meet my nephew for the first time. Going to try being Kira instead of Phantom for a while." She paused. "But I'm keeping the number, because maybe someday, when I've figured out who I am when I'm not a weapon, I'll decide what kind of operator I want to be. On my terms, my choice, my mission." Wolf smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time in memory. "Your father would say that's the most important mission of all. Choosing who you want to be instead of letting others choose for you." They walked out of the cemetery together, leaving behind the markers and the memories and the weight of 12 years carried alone in darkness. The autumn sun warmed Kira's face. The air smelled of leaves and possibility and the strange sensation of a future that wasn't already mapped out in classified operation orders. Somewhere in Washington, Deputy Director Nathaniel Cross was being led away in handcuffs, his empire of lies collapsing around him. General Theodore Kane was facing court-martial for treason, his carefully constructed career imploding in spectacular fashion. 5 flag officers had resigned or been relieved. Investigations were underway. Reforms were being drafted. The machine of military justice, slow but inexorable, was finally moving. But Kira wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about her younger sister Lisa, waiting with her 3-year-old nephew, about meeting James for the first time, about trying to be an aunt instead of an operator, a sister instead of a ghost, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, after 12 years of being Phantom, she could learn to be Kira again. Her phone buzzed one more time, a text from Lisa. "We're at the table by the window. James keeps asking when his hero aunt is coming. Don't keep us waiting." Kira smiled, a real smile, unguarded and genuine, the kind that had been lost somewhere in the snow of the Hindu Kush and was only now finding its way back. "Coming," she typed back. 5 minutes, and I'm not a hero, just someone who finally told the truth." She sent the message, pocketed the phone, and walked toward a future she was choosing for herself, one step at a time, leaving the ghost behind in the shadows where it belonged.